Ez, thanks very much for talking to me today. Just to kick off, because I was doing a memory test, I was telling you, looking back at your many things that you've done. How do you see yourself? What do you do? What are you about? What's
Uh,
your thing? You do lots of things, don't you?
yeah, well, primarily, I suppose I would describe myself as a writer, really. I mean, I've written 8 books. I wrote three novels for grown-ups in Welsh and one for children. I wrote two in English and a memoir which came out a year ago called Casual Life in Six T-Shirts, which was based around six T-shirts I've owned in my life and basically using those T-shirts as a kind of hook to tell a story. And one of them was telling the story of my old band, the Third Uncles, in the 80s, and what happened to us when we had a brief brush with a major record label and the adventures that followed and the misadventures. So just it's something I always wanted to write. I thought, oh yeah, there's all these stories knocking about, and I just couldn't figure out how to join them all together in a meaningful way. So I thought, well, the T-shirt is a useful little device because there are all kinds of books at the moment about a history of Britain in 12 castles or a history of this in six battles or whatever. So I thought that's a kind of trend that's ongoing, and I thought, well, I could use that really for my own story. But I write poems as well. I've got some poems in various magazines coming out. Spectator published a few of my poems, and I got some coming up just before Christmas in a magazine called The High Window. And of course, there's music, which has never really left me. Really, I mean, I even when I don't have a band or even when I don't play live, which I don't really is not really my natural habitat. I mean, I much prefer pottering about in studios. I mean, playing live is for me quite stressful, and I was trying to explain to my wife what it's like, because she doesn't play in band or anything like that. But it's like if you have a gig, it takes up your whole day, even though you're only on stage for about 45 minutes. You're constantly thinking about those 45 minutes all day long. So even if you have to do something in the afternoon, like go for a walk, I'm thinking, oh, but I can't because I got a gig in 5 hours time. So I have to almost psych myself up for it. So I find that quite stressful, really. So these days in my band, Six Sided Men, we don't play very often. Um, but we enjoy it when we do. But it's not something I would like to do 5 days a week. I don't know how touring bands do it. I mean, God, in the old days, I did do a tour with the Third Uncles, but I can't remember what it was like. But I think it was quite stressful. And so I enjoy pottering about, writing songs and hearing what they sound like. Because the joy of recording is that if it goes wrong, you can just go back and erase it and do it again. You can't do that with a gig, unfortunately. But
No,
yeah.
but they're more funny for that reason, aren't they? When things go wrong.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, obviously there's the excitement, and I do enjoy them, but I think the enjoyment comes from not doing it too often.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
in the Six-Sided Men, we've only done about three gigs this year, um, and we've got another three coming up, but one of them is in June next year. So it's
Yeah.
I like to spread them out so that they become events rather than something. I think bands can play too often. I
Yeah.
remember when I was in the Third Uncles, Chrysalis said, "You play too often in Cardiff." And we thought, well, we need to play because people need to see us and we need to keep. He said, no, you
Mm.
don't. You need to do one gig every 4 months in your hometown. Otherwise, people will get fed up and it becomes an event when it happens. And I
Yeah.
can see now what they meant. But of course, at the time, that was everything. You're playing live was your raison d'etre in a way, because in those days, home recording and stuff was a bit more esoteric.
We'll come on to Hang in the Moon, obviously, the album.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because we're going to talking to Spotify, which we will.
Ah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
I've got a lot of misgivings about Spotify actually, and I'm sure you have as well. But but it's a means to an end, I suppose. Um, I just let's go back to the third uncle's days. So the third uncle's was what was that? 80s was it?
Yeah, we started off in 1986, I think. I did our
Yeah,
very first
yeah.
gig in Sam's Bar, and I was intrigued. And the thing that motivated me to want to be in this band, and actually, I think I was the person who instigated it. Really, was were the Smiths, and I was
Oh
kind of
yeah.
semi-obsessed with Morrissey, and I wanted to almost be that kind of figure, and that's
Mm.
why I call myself Ayres, really. I mean, my name is Aaron, but Ayres was a kind of exotic pseudonym that I thought would
I've only
would
ever known you as S in my ex.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine. A lot of people
yeah,
do, a lot of
yeah,
people know me as Ayres, a lot of people know
yeah.
me as Aaron. Um, but yeah, So I was intrigued by that, and I wanted to create a band with a mystique, something that was a bit different to all the other bands that I saw around Cardiff. And luckily, at least Jamie was a huge Smiths fan, and so both of us, were I suppose Anthony and Rob were less so, but still they fell into the whole thing. But I think the beauty of the band was that we all listened to different music. Our drummer was huge Led Zeppelin fan, for instance, and I loved them as a kid, but I'd grown out of that. As he said arrogantly, but I felt I'd moved on from Led Zeppelin at that point.
Mm.
And Anthony was into all kinds of other stuff, exotic world music and stuff. So all these things joined together. But I think fundamentally, what has been there throughout all the bands that I've been in are songs, and I've primarily seen myself as a writer of songs,
Yeah.
and so it was a kind of pop mentality and melodic mentality that I think we brought together in this band, and that eventually got us signed. It got us a publishing deal with Chrysalis, which is
How
no
did
mean
that
thing.
come about then? As how did the deal come about?
Well, it was basically because the scene in Cardiff at the time, which I'm sure you remember well,
Well,
is
I remember well. I want to talk to you about that a little bit, but me and you a bit actually in a bit.
yeah, yeah. So I tended to write my own songs. If I heard a song I liked, I would try and write a song like it or something that reminded me a little bit of it, which is a bit difficult getting gigs because I said, "Oh, what covers do you play? Well, we play our own stuff." And that was a bit of a challenge. But we got quite good, I thought, and we thought, well, we're just wasted here. So we tried to get gigs in London. And at one of the gigs in London in Soho, a guy who knew Jamie came to see us, and he invited us to do a demo at Chrysalis. We thought, oh, great. So we went. But by the time we arrived, he'd left the company, which happens a lot with record companies,
Yeah.
the kind of shift of movement of people. Anyway, there was a new person in charge, and luckily she liked us even more than he had. So
Mm.
she signed us, even though there were hardly any, I have to say, support from the rest of the label wasn't huge. People couldn't see it, but she could, and she was very persistent, and she insisted on signing us. So she signed us on a 3-year deal, which was great. But ultimately, what happened then was that we were placed in a studio in the basement of Chrysalis Studios in London with Boz Boorer, who ended up being Morrissey's musical director and
Oh yeah.
guitarist. He's ex old
Wow.
Cats guy,
Yeah.
and but this was pre Morrissey. In fact, I remember when we first arrived, he said, "So, who do you guys like then?" And I said, "Well, I like the Smiths." He said, "Oh, I hate all that. That sounds miserable." And I've reminded him of that several times since.
Yeah.
In fact, recently I took part in a Morrissey tribute album that he was putting together,
Oh wow.
and I sang "Every Day's Like Sunday,"
Hmm.
which came out on CD, and I'm waiting for the vinyl release of that. And he recorded two versions of that. One was a T-Rex type arrangement, and the other one was a ska arrangement. And he couldn't decide which one was best, so he ran them past me, and I said, "Well, I like them both." He said, "Oh, I've got to ask Morrissey." So he sent them to Morrissey, and Morrissey liked the ska one best. So that's the one that went on
Oh,
the
that's a
album.
brilliant
I was
story.
quite, yeah, I was quite thrilled that
Yeah.
somewhere in Los Angeles, Morrissey was thinking, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that one."
Wow.
That's good. But the Uncles, we off the back of that, we got a single out. We used some of our own development money that we got from Chrysalis to buy musical instruments and or better ones. And then we recorded a proper single, which came out, and then we promoted it with a tour. And then Chrysalis would occasionally throw us tidbits of money, but ultimately, as bands are, we kind of fell apart, eventually, as bands do. So yeah, that's what happened to the Uncles. And after, I'd always been into country music, but it wasn't something that I could really do with the Third Uncles. It wasn't really a thing, and it was commercial death. So that's why I formed Six Sided Men now. But yeah, so Six Sided Men started as a country band, although we've evolved. We've been together now since 1990, God's sake, off and on.
Wow.
So we've done loads of stuff. We've done loads of cassette albums and CDs and stuff like that. But we've evolved, and we're still playing.
Do you remember what we were in bands at the same time? Yeah, we'd come across each other at gigs or whatever. You'd be probably playing Chapter Bar or Chapter Theatre or something like that. I'd be playing similar things. And if I see it from my perspective, um, I always thought you were very driven, and you went on to get signed, so maybe that's part of that. You're always very driven and kept very focused. I don't think we always had the best relationship in those days. I don't know whether we never know actually had an official falling out, but I think there was probably a sense of competition going on at that time. Because it was quite a good music scene. But we take all the cover stuff out of it. There were some really good original bands knocking around, and there were places as original bands to play. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like an exciting time. But I think I think we probably was a little bit of rivalry going on. But
Well,
one.
yeah, you're
Would you
right.
agree? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was a bit of an arse when I was young, so I don't know
Well,
whether
weren't
that
we
was.
all? I mean, God, so was I. You know, I, oh yeah, I think in my book, A Casual Life, there's a chapter on the Third Uncles, and I talk about this interband rivalry, and uh, and I talk about the time when Chrysalis actually came to see us in chapter, um, and two of them came down to see us, and everybody, all the other bands knew about it, and uh, and they came with demos tucked in their pockets, hoping that whatever. And we were so loud that night that the A&R guys walked out. I mean, and obviously people thought, oh, they've blown it, and so we thought they all chased after them. Oh, by the way, I'm in a band. As it happened, they'd only walked out because it was too loud. Because we
Yeah,
booked. I don't know if you remember, there was a guy called Busby who had a PA system
yeah, Cuspers, yeah.
that he used in massive places like the Great Hall at the university. Well, we booked that for Chapter Bar, which is a tiny space, and
Mm.
we mic'd everything up, so it was hellishly loud. But no, that rivalry was definitely there. We were friendly rivals with Papa's New Faith, who were different to us, but similar in the sense that
With
we were
Alex.
both kind of, I suppose, indie-based bands. But despite that rivalry, there was a lot of respect and whatever, because Jamie from our band had been in a band with Alex from Papa's previously, and then much later Kevin from Papa's joined Six Sided Men briefly, as a keyboard player. So there's a lot of Pete Frame type rock family tree thing going on. But yeah, I mean there was a bit of standoffishness, but it was never horrible or nasty. I mean, I was talking to somebody from Howling Sleepers. I suppose it was if and we never, even though they were hugely popular and a fantastic band, and I really loved Howling Sleepers, I never felt rivalry with them because they were operating in a totally different field to us. We wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. It was only bands that you felt were doing things similar to yourself that you thought, that you had this kind of weird kind of standoffishness with, that never got unfriendly, but it was always a bit cool, trying everybody.
Yeah.
I think everybody was trying to out cool each other really, and it's ridiculous because it's almost as if people were thinking, look, there's a huge table in London where people are discussing all the 7 possible bands from Cardiff who could end up having a number one album, which is ridiculous because there were scenes like this up and down the country in every single town and city in Britain, where bands, rather than focusing on rivals who were probably going to get the deal in London, were focusing on the band next door. I remember when we
Yeah.
did a gig in a hype club and everybody came to the hype club in London to see us, or we thought they did, but they didn't. They came to see Jesus Jones, who were
Oh yeah.
pre-deal, and we were the last band on just before them, and we thought everybody was there to see us. But of course, this band that we'd never heard of, and nobody, hardly anybody had except A&R. They were the bands who were getting deals. Not necessarily the band that you were worried about in Cardiff.
How would you, if you were in a young band now, if you could sort of take that perception, how would you sort of think it is now compared to then?
Well, first of all, I hardly ever go to gigs. I'm really lazy and I'm really terrible at being told to go
I
out
think
and
it
see
happens as you
anything.
get older, as I think you just can't be
Yeah,
bothered being
yeah.
out the house.
That's true. I mean, I just think it's not my ideal night out. I mean, I'll go to occasion. I mean, I want to see the Waterboys recently, but bands of that level, I'll go and see. But grassroots bands in grassroots venues, I'm afraid I don't really. And I think people say, oh, these venues are closing down, and of course it's tragic that they are, but that in a way is indicative of the way the music business is. I mean,
Mm.
back in our days, Steve, bands used to go out and hope to attract the attention of all these record labels live by playing live. Um, I don't think that's the case anymore. And also, crucially, bands don't really sell records. If you look at the album charts, yeah, very few new bands who actually make a massive impact. And if they do, they're number one week, and then the album drops down to 28 the following week.
Mm.
The things that tend to sell are generally heritage or people have been around for a while.
Yep.
Singles thing, which is, they're all DJs or so and so or this and that. And singles, they stay in the chart now for about 3 years. it's ridiculous. That whole thing, and I think that's missing. That excitement of who's going to be number one this week? Who's going to be? Is
Yeah.
it going to go up or down? That whole thing is missing.
Beatles in Tonopandi. Firstly, what I don't live far from Tonopandi. What a fantastic title, yeah, and what a great idea. Tell us a little bit about how that idea came about. This is the book now, Beatles in Tonopandi, and also your fascination with the Beatles because we're talking about '60s, you know.
Yeah, sure. Well, it was a short story, The Beatles and Tonopandi, that I wrote. It's almost like a satire on academic studies of the Beatles, and it's written in that style. And basically, what it does is tell the story of when the Beatles in 1967 got fed up with the fame and whatever, and pre-Maharishi decided that they wanted to get into pigeon fancying and moved to South Wales. And when they moved to South Wales and latched on to a guy called Tom Morris, who was a champion pigeon fancier, um, they found themselves in Tonopandi, where people had heard of the Beatles but didn't know what they looked like. So the Beatles, as disguise, turned up in with miners' helmets because they thought that would make them blend into the society before
Yeah.
realizing that nobody really looked like that. And then they got into pigeon fancing, and it was all going swimmingly well. They even went down to the local club, and Paul sang Yesterday, although they said, yes, it's very nice, Paul, but it's hardly Matt Monroe, is it? And then the Maharishi turns up and blows it all apart, and they run and
Oh
they're
wow.
never seen again.
I'm
And
gonna
this
read
was
that. I'm
taken
gonna
up
read
by,
that, I think. I want to
oh,
read.
yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
available. It's a book, The Beatles in Tonopandi, which is a
Yeah.
short story collection,
Mm.
and that features in there, and also other music related stories in there as well. But The Beatles in Tonopandi is quite interesting because it was taken up by an American publisher because it came out in this book here. Can you see that? In My Life.
Okay.
Uh, so that's when the story first appeared, and it was in there with people like Allen Ginsberg and Leonard Bernstein, Philip
Wow.
Larkin.
Wow.
Um, so it's a collection of stories and poems and whatever, all
Mm.
about the Beatles. And somebody in London saw this, and about 5 or 6 years later, I mean, I'd kind of forgotten about it up to a point. I got a message when I was on holiday in Spain saying, oh, I've read the Beatles and Tonopandi and want to do a collection based on it. And I thought it was just spam, so I didn't
Wow.
follow it up for ages. But a guy called Rupert Heath, um, he was running a company called Dean Street Press, and he published this collection, The Beatles and Tonopandi. And
Oh
the
wow.
story came out, and got David Hepworth saying, and Hugh Stevens.
What a great
Uh,
writer David Hepworth is, by the way.
yeah, no. Well, he wrote blurb for the front of that, so I was quite thrilled. I've read everything that David Hepworth
He's a
has
great
written. Really,
writer,
I
isn't
mean,
he? A great music
he
writer.
is. He's brilliant. But anyway, yeah. So that's the story of the Beatles in Tonopandi. Yeah, it was
Uh,
later adapted as a radio piece as well, which you can find on YouTube, I think, uh,
okay.
for April Fool on BBC Radio Wales, where we treated it as a serious documentary about what happened when the Beatles came to Tonopandi. I remember
Brilliant.
doing vox pops with people saying, "Do you
Uh,
remember when the Beatles came to Tonopandi?" I said, "No, never. I don't remember that." That's great. Um,
I was thinking with the idea would it make a really great little cult movie, you know?
yeah, well, it would. Um, I think the problem with Beatles related stuff is that you eventually have to represent the Beatles visually, and it never kind of works. You never find, people who look like them or sound like them convincingly. Um, on the radio version of that, we did find snippets of Beatle talk that we because there's a bit in the chip shop in the Beatles and Tonopandi where they turn up,
There's a good
and there's
chip
this
shop
guy
there,
with
actually. Yeah.
yeah. Well, there's a guy that the Beatles latch onto in the story who's got a tape recorder, and he follows them around everywhere with a tape recorder. And he records them in the chip shop ordering food, and that's when the Maharishi comes and spots them. And so for that, when we reconstructed that for the radio version, we had snippets of genuine Beatle talk, also with our own impressions of the Beatles talking, and all that, and Paul, with this kind of more nasal approach. So we
Yes.
added all those together and
Yeah.
good fun. You have to listen to it.
Is it for you in your head? Is there anything kind of Beatles-y going on in the way you do stuff?
Hmm. Yeah, well, there is. I think I'm hugely influenced by the song structure of the Beatles.
Right.
I like strict verse, chorus, middle eight, guitar solo, return of the chorus, and fade or whatever. Which is a very Beatlish kind of and very 60s and very traditional way of writing a song, really. But I can't imagine writing a song outside that formula, So
Hmm.
whatever the tune, if it's a slow one or a fast one or the feel of a song, I always feel that it has to have at least three different sections to it: the verse, the chorus, and the middle eight. And they all have to be tuneful and also work together. And if they don't, then I abandon the song. And very often they all come together magically anyway. And if they don't, then if you have to work too hard at something, and I, I usually move on to something else because I think that things that happen quickly and happen almost immediately. Certainly in music. I mean, maybe with writing you have to sculpt a little bit more, but because very often when I write, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to end up, which is fine. But with
Yeah.
songs, they have to work almost immediately for me because people have little patience with songs. They scroll on to the next one. So they got to be something that grabs you in the first couple of minutes, I think. Well, first seconds. I mean, I remember an A&R guy in Chrysalis. He used to get loads of demos, and he'd turn them off after 10 seconds. 10 seconds is all you had. If you
Wow.
had 10 seconds, no cassette went in the bin, and there was a huge bin of demos. And I
Mm.
remember when we wanted to do duplicate copies of songs we'd recorded down in Chrysalis Studios. Boz used to say, "Oh, grab a few of those demos and tape over them. Use those." So we were using somebody else's dreams of. And again, I talk about this in a casual life, imagining that maybe there's a band up from Scunthorpe or somewhere. Thinking, "Oh, we haven't heard from Chrysalis. They've had our tape for years now. Maybe they're really getting into it." But sadly not. Their tape was being recycled by the likes of
Yeah.
us.
Going back to what you just said about the tape thing,
Yeah,
I worked at Red Dragon Radio for for a
yeah, yeah,
few
of
years,
course.
and at the back of the building, um, they throw all the rubbish out, and the amount of music that was thrown into that skip. So then later on I started doing something called songs from the skip. So I'd
Oh, did
save
you?
them, try and save them and kind of play them, because if it wasn't
Oh,
like,
brilliant.
really obvious hits, if it wasn't really
Yeah, yeah.
charting, you know, who cares kind of thing was a philosophy. And it's just such a shame with music, isn't it?
That's a great idea. That's a brilliant idea. Songs from the Skip. Brilliant. That's
Could,
superb. I
could,
remember a band. There was a band called Charlie Brown. I mean, I think they only did about three gigs in Cardiff, but one of the songs they used to do Meltdown, and they weren't a great band, but one stroke of genius they had. They just did a song, and the guy had found a letter in the street, and he just read the letter and sang the letter as the
wow.
band played. And I thought that is genius. So it's a similar kind of idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something a bit unusual. So songs from the Skip. That's excellent.
Hang in the Moon. What's the title about? Is this a romantic song, Hang in the Moon? Is it, I think?
Yeah, well, I'm never very good with titles of things, and
Mm,
titles are usually the very last thing I think about. And I was
mm,
thinking, which of these songs has a reasonable title that I can use with an image? Because
yeah.
when you put these albums up on these digital platforms, they require an image. And I thought, well, I could hang in a moon. You can get a moon picture, which is copyright free, and I don't have to worry about being sued. And hang in the moon was a phrase I read about somebody who was loving somebody so much that they hung the moon on them. And I thought, oh, that's a nice little phrase. It comes from country music, I think. And I thought, well, I'll just use that phrase as a term in this song. So that's where that came from, really. There's no kind of huge significance to it apart from that, really. And a lot of these songs are love songs, so it's based on. I was listening to it the other day, and I'm thinking quite a few of these songs also have images of the sea and beach and seashores in it as well,
Yeah, yeah.
which is
Hence
kind
the
of
moon.
curious.
So the moon hangs in there quite well with that,
I
doesn't
guess,
it? With the
I guess,
tides and
yeah, it
whatever.
does.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Without being too scientific about it, but yes, yeah.
Are they autobiographical at all, or are they imaginary? Or
Uh,
mix
some
of
of
that?
them, some of them are, but the thing I find is that there's that phrase "happiness writes white." I'm fairly content and not a troubled soul, and haven't got a lot of demons inside me. But over the years, I have had. So if I have to write a song that's in any way that feels like it needs that kind of vibe, I think back to a time when I did go through something similar. So there's a song, "The Ground Beneath Your Feet," which talks about betrayal and being somehow not being up to the standard of the person you're with. And that is based on people that I've known in the past.
Mm.
rather than what I'm with, person I'm with now. So yeah, you draw on past experiences. So yeah, they're kind of autobiographical. Even a song like Lord Randall's Daughter, which is fundamentally a modern folk song, which dates back, incidentally, to the days of the Third Uncles. We originally recorded that with the Uncles, but never used it. We played it once live, I think, never fitted in with the rest of the set. But I always liked the song, so I went back to it. But that is a love story. So, love is universal. You can always imagine what you felt like or what you feel like when you're in love. So it's drawing on that emotion and trying to find ways of expressing it. There's that old phrase in poetry, the definition of poetry, what was often thought but never so well expressed. And that is the ideal. That's what you're aiming for,
Yeah.
trying to find something, a new way of saying something that's as old as the hills, really. Hence hanging the moon, I suppose, which is a way of saying I really respect you and I really like you. I want to hang the moon on you, you know. So yeah.
I know you say you play about 3 times a year. We in my band we don't play that often. Hanging the Moon, I'm just kind of imagining that, with the name of the band as like a lovely backdrop, with the imagery on it.
Uh, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of these songs we do in the Six-Sided Men as well. In fact, The Emperor's New Clothes is a song, again, which dates back to the Uncle's days, but we've recently revived it for the Six-Sided Men, and we will be playing that at our next few gigs. A couple of these other songs also will be destined for the band, but others are not. I mean, I tend to write I tend to be quite prolific and a lot of these songs, not all of them are usable. And we've only got about an hour and a half when we rehearse here in my kitchen.
It's quite a diverse album, and obviously it's one of several of yours on Spotify.
Mm.
Desert of Snow, I think, was the song I picked up on, wasn't it? Was that the one with the kind of the Tom Waits stuff going on?
Yeah, that was an accident. I played that to my stepdaughter the other day, and she'd never heard of Tom Waits, but I had to play some Tom Waits afterwards to show her. But that didn't start out as a kind of Tom Waits gruff voice. I recorded a straight version of it, but for some reason it didn't sound as good. So I thought this needs a character. So I adopted this Tom Waits type character,
Interesting.
and since yeah, and I took 2 takes to do it, and I couldn't speak then for the rest of the afternoon. Oh, damn, my
Yeah,
voice had gone. But yeah, so and I tried to get that whole feel, even the guitar solo. I tried to get that echoey, kind of reverby, kind of Tom Waits feel to it. Because guitar solos are always a bit of a challenge for me because I'm not a lead guitar player
not
at
me.
all. So I tend to keep them short.
Mm.
So we've got a superb guitarist in Six Light Men, Mike Slee, who's brilliant. So, but when it comes to recording stuff myself, I have to keep them a bit short and sweet and tight. So yeah, so no, that's how that came about, and also creating a character, which
Which is the
is
writer in
something.
you again, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But when you do create a character, you find that sometimes the words are easy to find, and the
mm.
whole atmosphere of a song
Yeah.
is easy to create. Because you're not yourself. You are this other person. Who knows? Possibly that's how people like David Bowie thought.
I just think the same thing with Ziggy. Yeah,
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 if I create a character, then
mm.
it becomes easier for me to
Yeah.
become him. But if I'm writing a book, I generally write in the first person, but it's not me. It's a character, that you've created. And it is a lot easier to do that than to say, when I was writing A Casual Life, even that, elements of that, you have to almost, even though it's an autobiography of sorts, even that, you have to create some distance between the I on the page and the I in you, because there is that I don't know, what do you call it? That creation of a self, that, and it's the same with a song, obviously. Not every word of a song is necessarily about you. It could be something that
No.
you've heard or
Mm.
something that you've used from the past. So,
Yeah.
well,
And
that's what I appreciate people's concerns about it, and I know there's
mm,
absolutely no money to be made out of it. But I think my qualms with Spotify tend to disappear because I don't expect to make any money out of it. I don't expect to make money out of music at all. I do it purely and simply to share my music, and I know that sounds really kind of altruistic and almost finger at the back of the throat, but it's true. That's what I like. I mean, I like people to hear them and listen to them, and that's just one platform that will enable me to do it. You
yeah.
know, uh, there are others, YouTube, others, Apple, and all that stuff.
And what you just said about songs and sharing songs, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Um, I interviewed the Blockheads years ago, and I was speaking to Chaz Jankel, yeah, And I said, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have asked him this, but I just said, so where's the buzz now? With performing, etc. Because you've kind of effectively, I didn't put phrase it this badly, but you've kind of done it all now. Why do you still do it? And he said, well, what about you? Have you ever played in a band? I said, yeah. He said, why did you do it? I said, well, I write these songs and I like to share them. I like to see the audience responding. So why we bloody do it?
Yeah,
So
of course.
it's a good point of view, really.
Well, that's why you do it. I mean, why else would you do it? And I don't know people who say, "Well, I won't do a gig unless I get paid for it." Well, fine if you're the Waterboys, or fine if you're, I don't know,
Yeah.
McCartney or somebody.
It's
But
nice to
you
make
know,
a
I mean,
few quid if you can to cover your expenses, but
oh yeah, of
it's
course
not
it is. I
everything.
mean, and
Yeah.
whenever we do a gig, we do a lot of we do a our favorite gig is a Christmas one we do, and that's generally for the homeless. For the homeless. I mean, we cover expenses for people who have to travel, like the drummer, whatever, cover his petrol and all that stuff. But it's not primarily about making money for. Oh, it's not at all about making money for us.
No.
We do occasionally get paid for gigs, and it's lovely when we do.
Mm.
But generally speaking, we do it to share our songs and share our music and have a bit of fun with it.